Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Jack Buttram, and I welcome you on behalf of the Evansville Museum to our first Thursday of the month meeting. Can you hear me? Is that better? Thank you. Would you bow with me in prayer, please? As we gather on this first Thursday of October, we pause to ask your blessing on this meal. We meet to remember and honor the part our Evansville community has played in maintaining the freedoms we continue to enjoy. There are those of us here who, although too young to participate as military veterans, who nevertheless personally remember living in Evansville during the war years of the early 1940s. We remember the Boy Scout paper drives, the rationing of gasoline, rubber, and sugar. We remember a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit, no new automobiles. We remember attending the state basketball tournament being played in the Coliseum rather than in Butler Fieldhouse because troops were being trained in Butler. We remember gold stars being placed in windows because that family lost a son or daughter in the fighting. We remember the Red Cross canteen, open 24 hours a day, serving snacks to military passing through, meant to tell our military that we appreciate and honor their service. And some of us will remember forever sitting in our desk at school, listening to the President's Day of Infamy speech, broadcast throughout the school. And yes, Father, we in Evansville have a lot to be thankful for, and ask you to continue to support our activities to recognize and honor all who were part of the war efforts, be they the fighting heroes or the hometown heroes. And we ask it all in your holy name. Amen. And now, Larry, would you do our pledge and our anthem?
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the United States, to the flag of the state. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oops. Please feel free to join in. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
And here's Mark Browning.
Thank you.
Good morning. Again, thank you for coming, as usual. Got several announcements before we get going with the main program. The main program, you know what it is. it's changed. It's going to be on the Holocaust by Bruce Green. Now, the people that we're going to talk about the War of 1812 from Lake Erie canceled out on Monday. So sorry about that if you're waiting for that. It has the tallest pillar in the United States. It's over 100 feet tall, and it's a World Peace Monument, and it's dedicated for world peace, and it's a very nice statue and commemorates the War of 1813 to some degree. This is our website, and Cole's going to navigate. If you get to our website, every one of these programs we have on YouTube, we have interviews of World War II veterans. There's an anesthesiologist here, and her husband wanted to listen to this, but so you go to YouTube right here, this is a website, and you get to YouTube, and then you double click there, and we have everything in order. So if you want to go to one of the last ones, so cold water submarines, and don't go too fast, okay? I can't keep up with you. If I can't, no. So this guy right here, cold water submarines, you remember it's about a month ago, and if you right there, so you double click on that, he talked about the Cold War, and then you go forward a little bit, you go past us, and then you get to that. So every one of these is up on YouTube, and you may have friends that want to hear some of these things. We had the history of anesthesia and war before, and we have all kinds of things, but we're trapping them by this video. So just so you know how to get to them, just ask your 5-year-old grandson, and they'll tell you how to do it. Okay, that's enough of that, but that's just a scope, and you can come ask us at another time. Cole will guide you through it if you want to know how to get through it, but you should be able to get some of these things in the future. Now, there's several announcements I have to make. The first one, before I forget it, this is Thursday, I believe. I have a sheet here Wednesday. Dr. Blanc gave it to me, but John McManus is an expert in World War II, and he's going to talk at U of E tomorrow night, October 3rd, at 7 p.m. at the Ridgeway Building. And he went to university. It's at ICAM Center, Ridgeway Center. It's the second floor of the Ridgeway Center. So it's free, it's open to the public. But he's a World War II expert. He's going to talk about the West. The East gets a lot more, Europe gets a lot more than the West, but he's a world-renowned talker. So you ought to go there if you can. Things that the museum has coming up in the near future. We had a fly-in of World War II birds last weekend, and it got rained out because of Hurricane Helen. And so we postponed that for 3 weeks. So October 19th and 20th, we will have that. And you can fly in a B-25, and I think there's a Grumman plane as well. And so you can bring your grandkids and anybody else, or nephews, nieces, or sisters, brothers, friends. That's October 19th and 20th of this month, a Saturday and a Sunday. Then Halloween is, I think, is a Monday, the 31st, but on Sunday we're going to have a Halloween at the museum. Last year we had close to 150 people, but it's very educational. It's what do you call it? Where you have to find things. So you got to think a little bit. It's not just giving candy out. It's a scavenger hunt. Thank you. A scavenger hunt. So they have to go to different parts of the museum. They have to answer a few questions. Got about 15 questions, but kids walk out with something more than just candy and playing around and jumping in a hoop or something. So I think we encourage you. It's going to be Sunday, so you'll have time, and it'll be in the afternoon. And you can also see our new Holocaust exhibit that Bruce is going to go over in length. Those are the two major announcements that I have. And then next 2 Thursdays from now, it will be the guy that sang the national anthem. His name is Larry Head, and he's going to talk about the Cold War. We've had a little bit on the Cold War, but he was a nuclear specialist and talk about some of the nuclear things that the United States has done over the last 60 years or so. But he's going to concentrate on that. And he's also given a speech on the hump about a year ago. His dad was over at the hump. That's over between India and China. So, but we have a new Holocaust exhibit that had a grand opening on Monday of this last week. We've spent a year and a half working on it. Bruce did a lot. About 10 different people did a lot. And it goes over he'll tell you 33 to 45 or so of what went on in the world and what Germany was doing. Then it goes over a special family here named the Rechnics. And 2 timelines. three different TVs with introduction and describing things. We have docents that go through it with you. We also have a map on the outside. It's a touch screen that will show some prison camps. It will also show different things. So I'm not trying to take his show, but I think you need to bring kids out there. I think the school system is supposed to teach, I think, once a year. It's to third graders, I think, and they can't remember all this stuff. Children need to know what's going on, what went on with the Holocaust. So Bruce has only taught this in the school for probably 35 years or so. He's really, he's been over to Auschwitz, or over to the Holocaust area twice with Eva Kors. Eva is one of the twins that suffered from experimental things, and she has a museum up there in Terre Haute. She talked at USI about 5 years ago. She was a great speaker, and Bruce actually went over there twice with her, so he has in-depth knowledge of the Holocaust. He just has too much knowledge in his brain, so he's going to try to get some of that and squeeze it out to you. Thank you.
All right, I apologize for not being who you expected today, but I got a little last minute notice this week that we didn't have a speaker, and I had done this last week for our volunteers as we opened the new Rechnic Holocaust exhibit at the museum. We did a training session with our volunteers last week. So that's basically what I'm going to do with you today, the same thing I went over with them. I'll try to do it a little faster today than I did last week. But I apologize to the volunteers that are here today for having to sit through this twice. But with our new Holocaust exhibit, we are trying to educate as the generation that experienced, that were survivors of, or that were eyewitnesses to pass away. It's vital to keep that history alive, to make sure that it never happens again. And that's the purpose of our exhibit at the museum. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to do this in a couple of steps for you today. I'm going to give you a little history of the Holocaust, and then I'm going to give you a quick tour of Auschwitz, because the Rechnic family, about whom our exhibit is focused, were both prisoners at Auschwitz before being taken on death marches to other camps. So I'll give you a quick tour of Auschwitz, and then I will talk about the Rechnics a little bit. We had a program on the Rechnics last year with Leslie Simmons, you might remember. So I'll give you a quick overview of the Rechnics' experiences in the Holocaust, and then I will show you some photos of our new exhibit. So what was the Holocaust? Well, the Holocaust was a deliberate, it was government-sponsored, organized murder. And it included over 6 million Jews and over 5 million other groups, including the Roma, who were Eastern Europeans who were nomadic. They didn't have a permanent home, so they were considered outside the norm. Homosexuals, political prisoners, Poles, the disabled. In the euthanasia centers in Nazi Germany, over 70,000 disabled people were murdered because they were considered not useful. So what caused the Holocaust? Well, there were a lot of factors. It would take a long time to go over everything that was involved, but the government sponsoring it was certainly the major thing, but it also included millions of people who simply made a decision to either participate in it or to ignore what was happening. And when citizens don't stand up and speak out, things can happen. And we see it with the results of the Holocaust with over 11 million victims. These quotes, and you can read them, are all from one guy, Adolf Hitler. And it kind of gives you the idea of his thought and how he considered certain groups of people. So, I usually, when I talk about the Holocaust, started with, let me get to this first. This is a pyramid of hate, and I would use this with students often. And it just kind of shows you how things can build. You know, if you start with bias, and then acts of prejudice, and then discrimination, and then violence can lead to a genocide. And it can start with simple things like stereotyping people, or bullying, and that kind of thing. And then it just builds. And that's what leads to a genocide. And these are the kinds of things that led to the Holocaust. So when I would teach the Holocaust, I would generally, you have to almost start with World War I. Because at the end of World War I, Germany was forced to sign a treaty called the Treaty of Versailles. And that treaty certainly put some hardships on Germany. It made them pay a lot of money in war reparations. It limited their military. It blamed the war on them. And then you throw into the fact that the world goes into depression, and the German people were suffering, and they were looking for answers. They were looking for somebody who could say, I can come in and fix the problems you have right now. And the Nazi Party begins to gain power and strength. And they offer the people a scapegoat, in essence. Now, this is simplifying things somewhat, but I used to kind of explain it to students like this, to try, and it's very simplified. I don't want you to think that this is exactly how it was, but it was maybe a way to help them understand how people might accept it. And I used the sports analogies in that way. You know, if you're in a ball game, I might say you're in a baseball game and your team loses, and you're bummed out when you lose something. And as a kid, you walk off and you're all bummed out, and your dad comes up and says, son, it wasn't your fault. The umpire was terrible. It was the umpire's fault. And then as a kid, you were like, yeah, it wasn't my fault. It was the umpire. If it wasn't for the umpire, we would have won. So the umpire becomes a scapegoat. So, like I say, that's a very simple explanation to what happened in Germany. The Nazis, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, offer a group of people as a scapegoat. Well, they held us back. The Jewish people held us back. If it wasn't for them, we would have won World War I. They were the cause of all our griefs. So the people, like I said, looking for answers like, okay, yeah, it wasn't our fault. It was their fault. Here's the thing, though. If you look here, in 1933, 9 million Jews lived in all of Europe. That was less than 2% of the entire population. In Germany, there were 500,000 Jews, which was less than 1% of the entire population. So you've got less than 1% of the people who caused all of our grief, according to the Nazis. So in 1933, Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany, and then immediately they begin planning. And they create the first concentration camp. The first one was Dachau, just outside of Munich. And then they build others. And originally, they're putting those considered dangerous to Germany in these camps. And it consisted of political prisoners and unionists, and anybody who spoke out against the Nazi policies at that time, and then it grows from there. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws are passed, and the Nuremberg laws take away German citizenship for anybody who's considered Jewish. Now, they actually racialized Judaism. They convinced people that being Jewish was a race. They actually created posters that showed how you could tell if a person was Jewish or not, some based on the size of their noses. And they created posters that showed if this grandparent was Jewish, how many grandparents and so on. There was a chart, and they posted those around. This is who's Jewish. So they convinced people, they racialized a religion. And they become persecuted as a result. It was basically legalized persecution. The guy in the picture there, Heinrich Himmler, he will become very important in the Holocaust. He is the head of the SS. And the SS is in charge of all of the things that become the Holocaust. So he's the guy that's leading the charge. And he's not the only one. I'm going to show you another guy that played a vital role in it as well. November 9th and 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht. It was the night of broken glass. And it was an organized attack on Jewish people. Government organized, although they didn't come right out and say, hey, go do this. On that single night, hundreds of people were killed. 30,000 Jewish men were rounded up and put in concentration camps. Jewish synagogues, businesses, and homes were looted and burned. And it all happened in the same night, but the Nazi government then told people we didn't know anything about it. The guy in the picture there, I put him on there because I had the opportunity to meet him several times up at Candle's Holocaust Museum. He was a docent there for many years. He passed away. He was I think 102 when he passed, but he was a teenager in Germany, and he was an eyewitness to Kristallnacht. His father and grandfather were both taken from their homes on the night of Kristallnacht and put in concentration camps. Now, they were lucky enough that his father was released, and they had family in the United States who would sponsor them and give them the finances necessary to get out of Germany to the United States. And it wasn't easy to do. But they were lucky enough that they were able to escape and come to the United States, and Walter ended up in the United States Army during World War II. But I got to listen to his story a couple of times about his experiences in Kristallnacht. So when World War II begins, with the invasion of Poland in 1939, shortly after that, the first ghettos are established. Now, ghettos are different than we consider ghettos today. The ghettos of Poland, many of them were in Poland, were taking a portion of a city and fencing or walling it in, and taking all of the Jewish population and forcing them to live inside that one small area. And again, I would explain it to kids like this. You live in a home, you've got your own bedroom, you're living a comfortable life, and all of a sudden, you're put inside a small area and you're living in a small apartment with 3 other families. And there's not enough food. And there's no medical care. And there's very poor sanitation. And your parents, if you're a kid, your parents are being forced as slave labor somewhere, taken out to work and brought back in the evenings. So life gets turned upside down as the Jewish people in the cities are forced into ghettos. And then in 1939, the Einsatzgruppen was also formed. The Einsatzgruppen were killing squads, and they were a part of the SS. Their job was to go into Eastern European villages, towns, and cities and round up all the Jewish people and murder them. So they would go into a small village and round up all the Jewish people. They would take them outside the city, dig a trench, and shoot them. Imagine if that was your job. Now, I've read about the Einsatzgruppen, and it was very tough on the soldiers that were members of the Einsatzgruppen's morale. Many of them had issues because of what they were doing as soldiers. In 1940, Auschwitz concentration camp was opened. It was originally opened in an old military base in Auschwitz, Poland. Auschwitz is the Polish word. Germany, in German, the word is Auschwitz. And that military base becomes what we will see as Auschwitz I. And then in October of 1941, they built Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau. And that's where most of the Jewish transports were taken. When they began to round the Jewish people up and take them to the killing centers. Birkenau is where most of the Jewish, and I'll show you pictures of these things. And then in 1942, the Wannsee Conference was held outside of Berlin. And this is where the final solution was organized. And this is the guy that was the architect of it. His name was Reinhard Heydrich. And he was put in charge of all security police by Himmler. He was put in charge of all security police. That included the Gestapo, the Einsatzgruppen, and others. The job was to go out and find anybody that was a threat to Germany and their policies. So he organizes, and this is the gate of Dachau. This was the first concentration camp. He organizes the Wannsee Conference, which takes place in this villa. And all of the heads of the different departments of the German government were ordered to cooperate with whatever they decided at this conference. And a number of the German leaders were there, and at that conference, they made the decision that we are going to exterminate the Jewish people from Europe. So with that plan begins the transports and the shipping of Jewish people to killing centers. Now, Heydrich did not live long enough to see his plans carried out. He was in Prague, and two Czech agents threw a grenade at his car, and it exploded, and he was wounded, and he died about a month later of infection from the wounds. So he did not live to follow up on the final solution, but it was carried out as best they could. So this is a map of some of the main camps throughout Europe. But let me tell you this, there were over 40,000 concentration camps, ghettos, sub-camps, killing centers, 40,000. So all of the main camps had sub-camps. For example, Auschwitz had 20 sub-camps. These sub-camps were located near places where they needed slave labor. So I will show you one when we get to Auschwitz, the Monowitz plant, but if they needed coal to operate their power, they would have a sub-camp near the coal mine to use slave labor to mine the coal. Or any plant where they're making ammunition or whatever, they would use slave labor in those camps. So they would have a place nearby to keep those workers. A smaller camp, but the living conditions were absolutely no better than any of the other camps. These people were being worked to death. The idea was we will use slave labor to do the things we need, and we will work them and feed them as little as possible and get as much out of them as we can, and when they die, we replace them. So, 40,000 camps, but only 6 of them were considered killing centers, were built as killing centers, and all 6 were in Poland. There was Chełmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek, and Auschwitz. And you can see the numbers killed in each of those. Auschwitz was a little different than the others in that it was not just a killing center, but also a labor camp, a concentration camp. The others were strictly killing centers. So if the train came into the ghetto where you were and you were put on a transport to Chełmno, you were being taken there simply to be murdered. They weren't large camps because they didn't need barracks for prisoners. There were barracks or places for those soldiers and workers that were working at the camp. There were gas chambers and there were incinerators, not large places. Auschwitz, though, was also a concentration camp, so it becomes a very large area. But it's also the largest of the killing centers. So this is an aerial view of Auschwitz from 1944. So this is the Vistula River, and Auschwitz is a town on the river. This is where Auschwitz I was located. This was the old military base where they organized Auschwitz I. And then Auschwitz II is developed up here, and I'll give you more information on that in a few minutes. This is a map of Auschwitz, the same thing that I just showed you. This is Auschwitz I, the old military base. This is Auschwitz II, and then Auschwitz III is right here. It's called Monowitz. It is the camp they built for the slave laborers in the IG Farben plant that was there where they made synthetic rubber. This guy is Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess was the commandant of Auschwitz twice. He was the original commandant, and then he was assigned another job, and then he was brought back later as the commandant, and he was the commandant of Auschwitz when it was liberated in January of 1945. He was arrested and tried after the war. He wrote his autobiography while he was in prison awaiting his trial, and I read his autobiography. He doesn't deny the things that happened there. He simply said, I didn't have anything to do with it. But he lived right on the camp. I'll show you in a minute where his house was. But in the trial, or after the trial, he was hanged on that gallows at Auschwitz for his war crimes. So this is an aerial view of Auschwitz I. So this is the old military base. Now, in Auschwitz I, these were brick buildings. They were old military barracks. There was one gas chamber and crematorium in Auschwitz I. It was right here. Not as large as the ones we'll see in a second in Birkenau. But look where the commandant's house is. But he had no idea what was going on. And this is an aerial view of Birkenau. Now, this is 425 acres. These are all barracks. And see this area over here? They were building new barracks when they were liberated. They had no intention of stopping what they were doing because they were adding on a whole nother section like this right over here when liberation happened. And I'm going to point out where some things were located in the camp before I give you a little tour. And then this is Auschwitz III. This is Monowitz. This is where the slave laborers for the IG Farben plant were kept. And this is the plant as it was being built in 1942. So they were using those people in Monowitz as slave laborers in this plant. This is the main gate to Auschwitz I, and it's a very famous picture. You see this a lot of times. Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. And this sign was put on a number of the camps through Europe. Propaganda. A lot of propaganda used in the Holocaust to convince people, and I don't know how much it did, but to convince them, hey, you got a chance if you work hard. Once you get inside the main gate of Auschwitz I, this building sits right inside the gate. This is where the camp orchestra would play, so that's what you see in this photo. They had a camp orchestra to boost morale of those being used as slave laborers. As they would go out of the camp during the day to work and come back in, they would play music. If you were a musician, it might save your life at Auschwitz. But this orchestra was also forced to play at Nazi functions for the Nazi officers and so on. These are barracks. I told you they were large brick buildings. They were formerly military barracks. They were called blocks here. Each one had a number, a block number. But they now are surrounded by barbed wire and electric fences. These are the bunks inside one of them. They're 3 high. Now, you didn't get your own bunk. There would be 3 to 4 people sleeping on each of those bunks. There weren't mattresses on those bunks. There weren't blankets in those bunks. Each of these barracks would be housing as many as 1,200 people. This is the execution wall between blocks 10 and 11. Several thousand people were murdered here as examples. So if you did something that they didn't like and they wanted to make sure nobody else did it, they would take you to this wall and shoot you right in front of everyone to discourage someone else from doing what you did. This is the gas chamber and crematorium number 1 at Auschwitz I. Now, it's the only one that survives intact. But this is where they would drop the Zyklon B pellets into the gas chamber that would create the gas that killed the people in the chamber, and then these incinerators were used to burn the remains. And then this is the gate to Auschwitz-Birkenau. So the trains with the transports would come down these tracks through that gate. And this is a map of Birkenau. So this is where I just showed you where the train would come in. This then was the selection platform. So this is where there would be a Nazi officer standing as you were unloaded from the train, and from glancing at you, they would decide whether you lived or died. They would look at you and determine if you looked strong enough, healthy enough to help them as a slave laborer. And if not, you would be sent another direction where you would be taken directly from here across this. There was a little bridge right there, and then back this way. Now these were wooden barracks, these were brick barracks. The brick barracks were the first barracks they built there, and then they built the wooden ones because it was cheaper and more easily built. And then this is the area they were adding on to when the liberation came. So you're now, if you're selected to be killed, and women, children, old people were who they were mostly taking here. They cross this bridge and they take them down this path. This was gas chamber crematorium number 2. This was gas chamber and crematorium number 3. This was gas chamber crematorium number 4, and this is gas chamber crematorium number 5. There were 4 gas chambers and crematoriums inside Birkenau. If you were selected as a slave laborer, you were taken on this path and you were taken to this place. They called this Canada. It was the processing center. If you were murdered, they didn't take you to anywhere. They didn't write anything down. They just counted how many people they killed, wrote that down, and took you to the gas chambers. If you were selected as a laborer, you were taken here, and you were Your clothing was taken away, your head was shaved, you were deloused, you were tattooed with a number. Now, Auschwitz was the only camp that tattooed its prisoners. Now, there were prisoners found at liberation in other camps with tattoos because of the death marches that will happen. When Auschwitz is liberated, they take all the prisoners that are there and march them to other camps to continue using them as slave labor. So you're taken here and that's all done to you. Then you're assigned to barracks and you would be given a job to do every day, and that would be your life until you couldn't help them anymore. Some were taken as medical experiments. And I'll talk a little about that in a minute. But this is the selection platform. I took this photo from that guard tower where the train came under that you saw in the earlier picture, looking down on the selection platform. So the trains would come in here, and this is where the selection would take place. So there is a rail car sitting right there. These were the wooden barracks on this side. These were the brick barracks on this side. Back here is where the gas chambers, crematorium, and Canada are located. So this is where, once you were selected, if you were selected to die, you would cross here, go back here to one of the gas chambers. If you were selected to live, you would be taken to Canada. This is the train car that sits on the selection platform at Birkenau. These are photos of selections that took place. You can see a Nazi officer standing here. Here they are determining from looking at you whether you live or die. Now, this is gas chamber and crematorium number 2. As the Soviets approached Auschwitz in January of 45, the Germans decided, the Nazis decided, we are going to get rid of the evidence as best we can. So they blew up the 4 gas chambers that were in Auschwitz. Now, the ruins remain, and here's the thing about the Nazis, they were meticulous record keepers. And they had photos of everything, and they had records of what they did. So a number of photos exist of these places. This is a photo of the furnaces, incinerators in gas chamber crematorium number 2. This is the ruins of gas chamber crematorium number 3. Now, in 2 and 3, the gas chambers were in the lower part of the building. You would go down steps. It was made to look like a shower room. They used propaganda right to the end. There was a dressing room when you would enter. There were signs up that said, remember where you hang your clothes so you can get them when you come out, and so on. Propaganda right to the end. And then the incinerators would be above ground here. This is the ruins of gas chamber and crematorium number 4. And this is the ruins of gas chamber and crematorium number 5. I show this because it kind of hit home with me when I was there. They call this the Birch Tree Grove, because over 400,000 Hungarian Jews were transported to Auschwitz in May of 1945. So many coming in daily that they couldn't keep up with the killing. So this Birch Tree Grove became a waiting room. It looks peaceful like a park there, doesn't it? These people are waiting to die. They're waiting their turn in the gas chambers. This is Zyklon B. This is the chemical that created the gases that killed the victims of Auschwitz. These are ash ponds, and they're located throughout the camp. They had to have a way to get rid of all the ashes from the furnaces. So they dug these ponds and they would dump the ashes into the ponds. So by each of these ponds, there's a sign like this. And this is Canada. This is the processing center. This is where they would take you if you were selected as a slave laborer. And then also at Canada were these warehouses. They were just down in front of this building. because as they would take these transports and they're going to take people to Auschwitz or any of the other killing centers, they would tell you, you have 1 hour to pack a suitcase, or 20 minutes, or whatever they gave you. And people, if you were told that, think about what you might put in it. Probably any valuables you had, if you had jewelry, silverware, things of that nature. Photographs. You know, you're going to put your family photographs. We didn't have the internet then, so they didn't have their photos saved on some drive or on their phone. Photographs were valuable to people. And things of that nature. So when they got to Auschwitz, they were told to leave their suitcase behind at the platform. It would be returned to them later. And then those suitcases were taken here to Canada, and everything was gone through. Anything of value that could be used would be separated and put in these warehouses. And there were warehouses full of suitcases, hairbrushes, enamel, jewelry, all the things that people would put in these suitcases were kept in these warehouses, shoes, anything that could be reused. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead one. So these are things that were in some of the warehouses there. You know, all the shoes. These are all enamel cups and pans. All of the suitcases that were brought there, hairbrushes, among other things. You know, one of the things I want to tell you that again was impactful to me were the photographs. When you go now to Auschwitz and you go in the Canada in the processing center, they have a room with walls of photographs because, like I said, these people packed their family photos. So now they have a display of these photos. And to me, that hit home because they're all photos of families doing family things. Picnics, a day at the beach, a wedding. Just normal families, people living their lives. And then this happened and it all came to an end. So those photos really hit home with me when I saw that wall of photographs. So these are just some photos I took of different places. These are the brick barracks. They did rebuild some of the wooden barracks. What happened to most of the wooden barracks after the war, the people of Poland, their homes and things had been devastated and bombed and so on. They came in and looted the wood out of these barracks and things to rebuild stuff with. Now all of the foundations are still there, but they did rebuild a row of the barracks so you could see what they would have looked like. These are the bunks inside the brick barracks. Again, there would be 3 to 4 people in each of those bunks. There were guard towers and electrified barbed wire fences throughout the camp. And then on the fringes of the camp, the guard towers were larger and made of brick. These are some of the foundations. All of those are foundations of the old wooden barracks. Now this is Eva Core. I don't know if any of you ever had the opportunity to meet Eva. Eva ended up living in Terre Haute, Indiana. Sorry, I'm going to take a drink. Oh, thank you, that'll be better. All right, appreciate it. Eva was a twin, and she lived in Romania in a small village. She said her father always told them, they were the only Jewish family in their village. She said her father said, don't worry, they're not going to come all the way to Romania to this small village to get one Jewish family. But they did. So as they were transported to Auschwitz, when they got off the train at the selection platform, Eva's mother was holding she and her twin sister Miriam's hand. And they were dressed alike. And she said the Nazi officer asked if they were twins. And she said her mother said, is that good? And she said the officer said yes. And she said, yes, they're twins. And he took them away. And she said that was the last time she saw any of her family other than her twin sister. But this is where the twin girls' barracks was located. So this is where Eva lived when she was at Auschwitz, and she said 6 days a week they had medical experiments done on them. Only 1 day a week they didn't. She said one day they would be in a blood lab where they would be strapped down to a chair and blood would be drawn and they would be injected with things that they had no idea what. And she said on the opposite days they were taken to an observation lab where they were stripped naked, every part of their body was measured, weighed, and so on, and then they all day long just had people observing them and making notes about things they did. Now, Dr. Mengele, who was a doctor at Auschwitz, took twins because he did comparative studies on twins. Like he would inject one with something and inject the other with a placebo, compare the reactions and so on. If one twin died, the other was automatically killed, and they did comparative autopsies. So Eva and her sister were here. And they did survive. Eva's sister died in the early 90s from complications of kidney failure, probably from, they say, from whatever she was injected with at the camp. So that's a quick tour of Auschwitz. Now I want to talk a little about the Rechnic family. These are the Rechnics, and these are the people on which our Holocaust exhibit is focusing. And they've got an amazing story of survival. I'm going to pull this up just so I don't miss something. So this is Edward, this is Regina, and this is their daughter Irene. And they were living in this town. And my Polish isn't great, so excuse me for my pronunciation of some of these words. Actually, my Polish is non-existent, so that's less than not great, isn't it? Dąbrowa Górnicza. There were 5,000 Jewish people living in this town. Edward was an educated man. He was an engineer. He ran a coal mine. They were living a good life in this town. The population, Jewish population in the town was 5,000. So as soon as the Nazis took control of Poland, they began to create the ghettos. Dąbrowa Górnicza had a ghetto created, and that's where the Rechnics were living. And they were being used as slave laborers there. And then Regina and Irene were taken to, or they were all taken to Srodzilla, another ghetto, which was much smaller than the one they were in here, more crowded. And then Regina and Irene were taken to another camp for a while and then brought back to Srodzilla where they were together. But at this point, the transports are taking place. The trains are leaving daily from these ghettos loaded with people. And the Rechnics realize this is a dangerous thing. So they are able to find a Polish family that takes Irene. You know, they paid them some money to take her and hide her. And it was a family that had worked for Edward at the coal mine, so he knew them. So they took Irene and hid her for the remainder of the war. She became a hidden child, and it saved her life. Because shortly after that, Edward and Regina were taken to Auschwitz in a transport. Had Irene been with them as a 9-year-old child, she would have been murdered. So finding a family to take them saved Irene's life. So they were taken to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and they were prisoners here. They were being used as slave laborers. Eddie had skills as an engineer they could use, and Regina was strong and had a number of skills herself. She was used in a number of different jobs while a prisoner. And then in January 1945, the Soviets are moving in on Auschwitz. So the Rechnics end up on death marches. Now, these death marches were in the middle of the winter, very, very cold. They had no proper winter clothing. They just had the uniforms they had at the camps, which were thin cotton. Many of them didn't even have shoes, or they had stuff wrapped around their feet to protect them, walking for over 30 miles in the middle of the winter. They had been being starved for a long time at this point, so they were malnourished, very weak. If on these death marches they slowed down, they would be shot. If they fell out, they would be shot and left. Regina's sister was with her, and they were walking along, and Regina's sister was very weak, and Regina was holding her up, and they were walking through snow. And her sister bent down to pick up some snow to put in her mouth to quench her thirst, and a Nazi shot her and killed her. So Regina was holding her sister when she died on this death march. They were then both taken to different camps. Eddie ended up in Mauthausen, which was a very brutal place, slave labor camp. Regina ends up in Ravensbrück, and it doesn't actually show it on this, but it was in northern Germany. And it was a women's camp. Both continued to be used as slave laborers. So this is Ravensbrück, where Regina was taken, and this is Mauthausen. Now, if you've ever seen pictures of Mauthausen, it was part of what they did there was a rock quarry. So the slave laborers would be in the rock quarry. They would have to break these sections of rock and then carry them on their backs up these stairs. These were stairs out of the quarry and then back down, and they did that constantly all day long. Very brutal, with very little food and nutrition. And then liberation happened, and Eddie was actually liberated from a sub-camp of Mauthausen, and Regina was liberated from a sub-camp of Buchenwald. So when the war ended, after the liberation happened and the Germans surrendered, the survivors of these camps, as they're found, and then I just want to point this out because there are people in the world that say the Holocaust didn't happen. And that kind of ticks me off because American heroes, soldiers, General Eisenhower, were eyewitnesses to these things. They went into these camps. They liberated these camps. It's documented. There are photos of it. So when someone tells you it didn't happen, they're calling the heroes from this nation liars. So they were reunited. They were first sent to relocation camps. They found each other eventually. An aunt found Irene, went and got Irene, and they were all reunited, and they ended up living in Antwerp, Belgium. Eddie and Regina both ended up in the hospital, Eddie for over a year from the malnutrition and the illnesses he suffered from these camps. And then Eddie's got a sister who lives in Evansville, Indiana. So they make arrangements because you had to have somebody to sponsor you that would say that they would vouch that financially you could support yourself and so on here. And they ended up moving in with his sister in Evansville, Indiana in 1953. And then Eddie gets a job sweeping floors at International Harvester. And he's visiting with a friend who has a clothing store on Main Street and a clothing factory. And he's in the factory and he notices that they trim the cloth and they drop the scraps on the floor. And he asked the guy, "What do you do with those scraps?" And he said, "We gather them up and sell them by the pound." So Eddie bought a pound of these scraps. He went to the dime store. He bought a pattern for boys' pants and a pair of scissors. And he went to a pawn shop and bought a sewing machine. And he took these home, and his sister helped teach him how to sew. And when he got 10 pairs of kids' pants made, he would take them to the stores and sell them to them for $2 a pair. And the quote I read that he said in a newspaper article was, "I was in business." He went and bought a second sewing machine. Eventually, he owns Edwards Manufacturing on 6th and Ingle in Evansville. He had a clothing store on the first floor, and the factory was on the second floor. And he operated this until 1980, I believe, is the year that he retired. But some of you may have shopped at Edwards. Some of you may have Eddie's clothes still in your closet. We've got some in our display at the museum. So the Rechnics lived an amazing life of survival. They persevered. They found the strength to survive something that most of us cannot even come close to imagining. And they continued to build their life afterwards. And Irene passed away in 2022. Her parents both passed away in the 80s. And when she did, she wanted to make sure that the story was never forgotten. So she established a couple of things. She established the Rechnic Lecture Series at the University of Southern Indiana, which is an annual program to teach about the Holocaust. And through two of her friends, Ann Blanford and Leslie Simmons, the Evansville Wartime Museum has now created the Rechnic Holocaust exhibit that is now open at the Evansville Wartime Museum. And this is kind of a sneak peek of that exhibit. This is the exterior, and it was kind of built to look like the outside of a rail car, of the cattle cars they used. Once you get inside, you step in the door. This is the dedication to the Rechnic family, and then it tells their story. Now, there are 3 video screens in this, and it depends on the amount of time you have, because a person could go in there and read everything and watch all the videos and spend well over an hour just in that exhibit. But it's designed to hit several different groups. So it's designed to hit skimmers, swimmers, and deep divers. That's what they said museum talk is. So if a person wants to just go in and spend some time and learn as much as they can in a short amount of time, we recommend there's a video they watch with David James telling briefly the story of the Rechnics. And then the timeline that you see here, the top part is the Rechnic story, the bottom part is the Holocaust in general. And then on the outside, we have an interactive screen with maps of the Holocaust. You can touch it. You can go to different maps and look at different parts of the Holocaust on that. So the timeline goes around. This, I think, is a very powerful part of the exhibit. This is the Rechnic family's family tree. The ones in bright white you see are the survivors. So they lost like 70% of their family in the Holocaust. And the timeline goes around to the end of the war. And then we have the story of the Rechnics here in Evansville. We have an exhibit case with, these are some clothing items from Edwards Manufacturing. And we've got some of the Rechnics' belongings in here, and then some general Holocaust items here. And then we have a poster board with lots of extra information about the Holocaust on it as well. And then this was what Irene said she wants. She wants to make sure that we never forget and it never happens again. And hopefully all of you will make it out to the museum to see this new exhibit. Thank you very much for your attention today.
First question, I want Dr. Smith to stand up. And his dad was a doctor in World War II. Get him a microphone, please. Turn the lights on. Dr. Smith, his dad was a doctor that was there when they released some of the prisoners. So go ahead and speak, Dr. Smith.
My father was in
Closer to the mouth.
My father was in Europe, in the Army in World War II. His unit came across a concentration camp, not on the first day, but on about day 7. And he witnessed in person what you have shown us in the pictures. The smell of the place, not just human waste, but the smell of the burning bone and the ovens, the people, grown men weighing about 80 pounds. He said, by the way, he was a doctor. He tried to treat them. They tried to feed them, but they just kept dying of typhus, tuberculosis, and end-stage starvation. And he talked about it only once or twice. I think because he couldn't stand the memory and the way he was dealing with it. To get on with his life was to, as much as possible, return to our country and not relive the things that he had seen. But it was very real. And I don't see how anybody can deny that it existed when it was witnessed by so many millions of people. But anyway, that's all.
Thank you very much.
Any other slow down. Any other questions out there? I see somebody. I have 3 or 4 questions. Then you can think of some more out there. Number one is, when you look at that train, it looks like the same trains that we used in World War I. If you look at the 48, in World War I, those trains had 40 people or 8 horses, and they had the wheels closer to the center. And they're not a normal train. I think the tracks were a little closer together. Do you know about that at all, Bruce?
Yeah, they were basically the same trains, yes.
Same trains as in World War I?
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, they did build on a lot of them, they built a guard tower on the back of it where a Nazi guard would stand inside that tower as the train went along. But there were no windows, there was no ventilation, there was no bathroom, there was no water. They had a bucket in there. There was not room to sit down, so you were standing up as you traveled in these train cars.
And World War I, we called it 40 and 8, 40 soldiers or 40 horses. I think you had close to 80 of these people in these trains, so
Yeah,
they really had
100
packed
in
in.
some of them, yeah.
100. Second thing, Eddie had, from what I can remember, 81 or 91 sewing machines by the time he gave up his industry. But I think from 1 sewing machine to 91, he had a heck of an industry there and would sell some things to the government as well. And third comment about Irene, you know, Irene learned to read on her own. She was a hidden child. She had to be quiet all the time. And one of the stories that Leslie or Ann told us about Irene or the family, that Eddie was working at this coal mine, and he'd bring a lot of the coal miners would want to drink beer. And when they get done, most of them are fish eaters, that's Catholics, and they would come over to their house and drink beer after they worked in the coal mine. And Irene didn't like that. But during the war, they found this fish eater, some of these fish eaters that, the fish eaters are Catholic, that came and drank beer at their house, and they helped hide little Irene. So they always had a fondness for the fish eaters after that happened, because Irene was saved as a hidden child by these. And she lived upstairs and hid the whole time. And so she learned to read. She read 4 different languages. And we spent one evening at Barnes and Noble's with her. And the professor from IU came down and talked. It was a real light topic. It was on Dante's Inferno. And she'd only read it in 4 languages. And I think the professor was the boss, but I think Irene knew more than the professor. And she'd always read the New York Times and go to New York City for a month or 2 at a time to help translate French things. And so she was a real genius, and these are survivors. Look at all the obstacles they had. Look at what they overcame. We've got all our obstacles in life. We think they're pretty big, but my gosh, look at those obstacles. We got to have some more questions now. Anybody over here? Over there. Have somebody from our society that we didn't even hardly know, because as Dr. Smith talked about, they didn't want to talk about it. Irene had come to our house some. We couldn't squeeze anything out of her. She wouldn't talk about anything. Her best friends, she would never talk about it. She wanted to put it behind her, but she also gave money to the Evansville Rehab Center over on Washington, or Bellmead and St. Mary. She used to go there and swim, and she appreciated all they did for her. She couldn't see very well. She never drove, but she would go over to that rehab, and she gave them some funds, as well as some of the funds were directed to the museum and the other ones at USI. But they were a generous family. Okay, introduce yourself.
My name's Lori. I was curious if you know any of the details of the family's reunification.
Bruce, we've gone over she asked the question, do you know about the family reunification? Bruce, you may remember it. I think
there's not a great deal of information because they didn't talk a lot about it. The information we have mostly are from a few news articles where they were interviewed a couple of times, but as far as telling all the details, we don't know all the details.
Hi, my name's Rick. Go ahead. Did I jump in front of somebody? Okay. I notice in especially the older movies that the Star of David was worn. I'm assuming they done that in the camps too?
In the camps they wore a star, or mostly they wore a triangle, and there were different colored triangles that represented why you were in that prison.
Okay.
So if you were Jewish, you wore a yellow triangle.
I see.
Homosexuals wore a pink triangle. And then they also, in the ghettos, they wore the stars, and sometimes they would have those also in the camps. But the star would say Jew in the language of the country from where you were.
Okay, that answers part of my question. Now, let's say, for example, if you were a gypsy, was there a special symbol?
There was the triangle would be a certain color, and I can't remember what the color was for the
Were these groups treated differently? Like if you needed to send somebody out on a work detail or something, were the other groups given preference?
Mostly the work was based on skill. If you had a skill they could use, then you would be used. But no, now they were segregated inside the camp. There was the Roma barracks and so on, the Jewish barracks. So they were divided that way. But as far as the slave labor, it was, how can you help me?
Okay, very good.
Why is there a resurgence in Holocaust denialism?
That's a great question.
The question was, repeat the question.
Why is there a resurgence in Holocaust denial? I wish I knew. I think some of it is the fact that those who were the eyewitnesses are disappearing. And there's not an eyewitness to, But you know, the things I said there, and you said it as well, that these heroes here were eyewitnesses to it. But then also, the Nazis were such meticulous record keepers that I don't know how anybody can possibly deny it and really believe it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a hatred, I think, and sometimes hatred grows, and I don't know what makes it grow sometimes. Those are the kinds of things, though, we've got to keep telling these stories to prevent it. You know, we've got to teach kids about prejudice and hatred and how that can lead to other things.
And Bruce, you tell us exactly what the obligation is to the Indiana school system to teach anything about the Holocaust. Tell us the exact rules that are given.
Well, I don't have it in front of me, but it's not real specific. It simply says that every U.S. history course in Indiana will teach a unit on the Holocaust. Now, and Eva Core, who I talked about before, she was instrumental in that being put into Indiana code. She met with the legislators and the governor numerous times until that happened. It's not specific enough. It needs to be elaborated on, and I don't know. I know there are a lot of schools now that teach the Holocaust also through literature and through books and that way outside the history classes. So, you know, it can be taught in different ways. It doesn't have to be in the history. Although it's required in U.S. history, it can be taught in other areas, and there are a lot of teachers doing that in language arts classes and things of that nature. The problem with history in the schools, there's so much of it. And you've got a semester to teach the entire history of the United States. So going into detail is very difficult. Now, I was lucky enough a number of years that I taught, I got to teach a course specifically, an elective course specifically on World War II and the Holocaust. And I absolutely loved teaching that because you could go into so much detail then, and you could get into the what happened and why and so on. But it's very difficult to do that in a regular classroom because you're so limited on time. The state gives you a curriculum and says you've got to get through this in a semester. So you don't have time to go into details on the things that you would really love to be able to.
Nancy Sanderson, can you stand up, please? And then I'd like everybody from the Education Committee to stand up, please. I know who you are, so you better stand up. Now, these people are going to try to take the road show. I know there's more of them than you're seeing, but anyway, there's about 15 of them, and going to try to cut this whole exhibit up to some degree and take it to schools within 50 miles, and then you have a tangible experience with people that are heartfelt on it, and I think it'll help with what Bruce is talking about. Teachers don't have to go learn it all themselves. We can bring it to their doors. So this is being implemented now, and hopefully it'll be in effect here in the very near future.
On behalf of the education, okay, I got it. On behalf of the education team, I just wanted to share with you our new focus. We're now going into some nursing homes by invitation, and we get to bring our wares. We were at North River, and we were at Hamilton Point. We had great audiences, and the people obviously were the age that they could really understand. We bring we have a PowerPoint that shows the Evansville Wartime Museum and in its entirety. And then we bring Rosie, the Riveter, along. And then we have Mike Lynn, who also shares some of his opportunities of teaching how the museum has been formed and the new exhibits that are taking place. We are really excited because now we are going to take our trailer with all the goodies in it and also have a second opportunity to teach at the museum. So if you have any families or friends that are in nursing homes, we would love to have them come. We would love to go to them. And if a day comes by where you'd like to come out to the museum, we will plan a tour for you if you so desire. It's open, and it's open from 10 to, or is it now winter? 10 to 4. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 12 to 4. We are in winter.
Yes.
12 to 4, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And Larry had just left early so he could go out and open up the museum for people to come. So we are ready and willing to do whatever it takes to share the message. Thank you.
Thank you for your attendance, and come out to the museum and bring some relatives or friends to see this exhibit. And you need a little time. You can't do it in 10 minutes. You got to not be a skimmer or a swimmer, or you got to be a deep diver. So that takes about an hour just to do that exhibit if you want to do it some justice. So that's, as Bruce said, those are the 3 types. We've got a lot of skimmers, but we want a little bit deeper than that. Thank you again. We'll see you in 2 weeks.